This video is for the spring part of the Where Your Heart Is quilt, and this video in particular is going to focus on the spring planting block. I've already done the spring rain block, and as you can see, I have already stitched it out. I have it trimmed. One thing to watch for that's a little different in this quilt versus other Hoop Sisters quilt is that there's going to be a different joining technique, so the trimming will have to be different on each of the blocks, and the instructions are clearly marked on that. I would recommend, you can see here where I've written 1.5. I needed to trim it 1.5 through all the layers from the basting stitch. And as you can see, the fabric didn't go down that far, but that's okay. That's, as you see when we do the joining video, you'll see that that is not important. But make sure that you clearly mark and trim your blocks correctly. So there's my spring rain. Now spring planting and spring rain require the same fabric requirements. We have our grass fabric, we have our background sky fabric. We are also going to need water-soluble thread and an embroidery bobbin thread. You will also need a wide variety of different colors of polyester embroidery thread. It's just, we can't really tell you what colors specifically because all your fabric's going to be different. In our instructions, we will show you and write on there what we use, specific fabric and specific thread colors and stuff. And you can make changes if you want to. You have your square of wool batting, and this is optional. You don't have to put it in there, but it does add a little extra layer of dimension to your quilt. I already have it trimmed the right size and the edges pressed down so that they don't get in the way of the presser foot. And of course you're going to need your background fabric, and so we have a cute little fairy tale background fabric we're going to use for our block. So let's get on with step 1, which will be putting the water-soluble thread and the embroidery bobbin thread will go in the bobbin, and we're going to sew an outline to show where to place our wool batting. Alright, we have our step 1 finished. It might be hard to see in the camera, but it has the stitching with water-soluble thread, and that is our placement stitch to know where to place our wool batting. If you're not going to use the wool batting, just skip the step and move on to step 3. So I'm going to stitch mine out now, and again I'm still using water-soluble thread and embroidery bobbin thread in the needle. Okay, for our spring rain and our spring planting, we have step 1, 2, and 3 finished. We have our battleizer in the hoop. We have our wool batting that's been put on there, and it's zigzagged onto the wool battleizer. And we also have step 3, which is just doing a placement stitch for the other pieces of fabric that'll be on here. So that's what you'll see here. And just a little tip, raise your presser foot to the highest position your machine will allow. And also as it's stitching, as it's doing this line of stitching, just kind of keep your finger ahead of the presser foot and to push the wool batting down, and that'll keep your presser foot from getting caught in there. And it's usually very easy to do, and we don't have any problem with that. Step 4, we're going to be adding our background or our sky fabric. So we're going to be taking our fabric and just placing it, centering it over the top area. You're going to want about 1/2 inch on the sides, about 1/2 inch on the top, and at the bottom you're going to want to just pull this up right at where that line of stitching was, and if you have about 1/4 inch there, quarter to scant 1/4 inch, then you should be good. So I'll take it to the machine, and with the water-soluble thread I'll just sew a tack down stitch to attach that to the battleizer. Okay, here is our completed step 4. Step 5, we're going to add our final piece of fabric there. So I have my grass fabric. It's kind of a mossy green color, and I'm just going to lay it right side down with the raw edges even and evenly placed on both sides. And I'm going to change to a neutral thread. I'll still leave my embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, but I will change to a neutral thread and the machine will stitch a seam. Okay, we've done step 5, which is sew the seam, and now we're going to flip that fabric over and give it a little finger press. The other thing we're going to do is we are going to also at the same time go ahead and we're going to put our backing fabric on here. So you just want to make sure that it's centered on there as well as you can get it. And you can use spray a little temporary spray adhesive on there if you want to. If it isn't sticking, just do it over a trash can or something so you don't gum up your hoop. And then we're going to put it on the machine. We're going to make sure that our fabric is, the fabric on the back stayed in place when we put it on there. We're also going to make sure that this is nice and smoothed out and finger pressed, because at the same time it attaches the backing fabric to the back of the hoop, it's also going to do the tack down stitch for this last piece of fabric. So this is water soluble thread in the needle and embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin for this step. Okay, step 7 is next, and we're going to be sewing some of the crops that are coming up here in the grassy area. So here's a light green thread in both the needle and the bobbin. At this point you're going to have to match your needle and your bobbin thread. And another tip also is, since our backing is now on, you might want to bring your needle thread or your bobbin thread to the top of the block. So do a needle down and a needle up and pull that bobbin thread through, and that way it'll make a nice, prettier, cleaner looking back to your quilt. Okay, the final step, step number 8, I believe, is the rain. This is every farmer's dream. We have our crops coming up, and the next thing we're going to stitch out is our rain. You might want to take note of what thread you used in all your blocks throughout the entire spring 4 blocks, and continue to use the same color thread so that you're consistent. So you might want to mark that down on your instructions. So let me sew some rain, and we'll get back to looking at the final block and how to... Okay, so we have our rain stitched out, and I just used like a gray. You can use a matching color to your fabric, whatever your preference is. Just make sure you keep it consistent throughout all the spring blocks and where your heart is. You will have a few jump threads to stitch out, cut out I mean, and just a couple more. And then what you're going to do is we're going to trim it. But you need to make sure, and you'll have to look on your instructions, how you trim it is all based on where the block is on the quilt. And this corner and this side and this corner, this particular block is on the end right side of the spring row, and it's also at the top. So we will be cutting these in a 1/2 inch through all the layers from the basting stitch. So I'm just marking this so that after I take it out of the hoop that I won't mess it up. Down here it's going to be 1.5 inches. So I'm going to just write this on here underneath the fabric. That way if your lighter fabric of your border sashing between the rows is lighter than the color of your ink, you don't want that showing through. And since this side will be attached to another block, we're going to use the trimmer by George or the trimmer 2.0. So I'm just going to write that on there. So we'll take it over to the cutting table and we will go ahead and cut our blocks. Okay, so it's time to trim our completed block. The first thing I like to do is to cut the sides that are going to be cut through all layers. And I have them marked, and I really recommend that you verify it with your instructions to make sure that you did mark it correctly. So I have my trimmer by George, and I'm going to use the ruler side of it. And so this side here, it says 1/2 inch. So I'm going to line up my 1/2 inch mark. I'm going to trim this off of it. And I have same thing for this side right here. So go ahead and trim a 1/2 inch right here. And then this is the side that gets 1.5 inches. which is convenient because there's a little stashing mark there that the dashes are different, a little more bold. And then the final side is cut by the Trimmer by George, or the Trimmer 2.0. And that is the metal edge on your Trimmer 2.0. You're going to lift up your fabric just like that. This is the side that is going to be sewn to another block that'll be trimmed exactly like this. Make sure there's no fabric peeking out, and if you did it right, there shouldn't be. You do have to use a 60mm rotary cutter when using the Trimmer 2.0. And this seam will then, after the, you can see all the batting and the backing fabric has all been cut away up to the basting stitch. And now we are going to trim this down to 1/4 of an inch as our seam allowance. Okay, so here is our block all trimmed up. And if you don't worry about having any concerns about the fabric not meeting to the bottom of the battleizer, your seam will actually be sewn right there, so you don't need to worry about that, and we'll talk about that later when it comes time to join it all together. So this is our Spring Rain, and we've completed, no, Spring Rain was the other one. This is our Spring Planting. So we'll move on now to one of the other spring blocks.